to your Yin Yoga practice. For today's practice, you may want to have with you a couple of yoga blocks and maybe a blanket, especially at the end when we get into our final relaxation, but you might want it for some of the poses in between as well. So feel free to grab those things and come back to your mat. So just a few reminders before we do get started in our practice. So a Yin practice is not a restorative practice. And as much as I encourage props, those props are to help us hold the poses comfortably in an uncomfortable manner at the same time, as opposed to a restorative class where we fill all the nooks and crannies and let our body just completely rest. The point of a Yin class is to create space in our joints. The focus is not on the musculature. So we want to try to not think about activating or stretching the muscles as much as possible and think more about the connective tissue, creating space in that connective tissue, whether it's the fascia throughout our whole body or in the joints specific to the pose that we're doing. And that's where I want your focus to rest during this practice. Each pose will be 3 to 5 minutes long. Try to find some stillness in the pose. Try to hold the pose. You can back out if you need to, but try to hold it so you get that space. It takes a while for the connective tissue to release and kind of move and create that space. So that's why time is basically our buddy in a Yin class. We want to hold the poses for a longer period of time. You can play your own music if you like. I recommend something without lyrics, just so it's soothing and calming. You can follow me on Spotify. I have a few playlists there. You can find your own. So we're going to start in a seated position. And we're just going to take a moment to come into the space. So finding those sits bones, sitting up nice and tall. We want nice length in the spine. And maybe just lift our shoulders up and then gently let them glide back down again. And just find our breath, breathing in through nose and out through the nose if we're able to. Not forcing it, just letting the breath come and go, kind of just witnessing it coming in and out. And as we move throughout our practice, as we hold our poses, I'll remind you many times throughout class that we want to avoid holding the breath because that makes us tense up. But we just want to find a nice, easy breath, a little on the deeper side if we can, but allowing it to come and go easily. So let's just take a few breaths here. Letting the jaw soften, maybe eyes are closed or just slightly open. Let them be soft. And while we take a few breaths here, let's just set an intention to find our soft edge in each position. So in a regular all levels class or a regular vinyasa flow, you want to find your edge where you can. That's where we create changes in strength and flexibility and we find growth. Whereas in this practice, we want to soften that edge a little bit. So maybe we find the edge and then we pull back just a bit so we can hold the pose for a longer period of time. Let's take one more big breath here. Inhale and exhale. And we're going to find our first posture, which is going to be caterpillar. Now I'm going to use my phone to time how long we're in these poses. So I don't keep you there for just a minute or I don't keep you there for 10 minutes. It keeps me on track too. So caterpillar is essentially a forward fold with our legs extended. And if you feel like you want your hips lifted a little bit, you can sit on top of a blanket. I'm not going to use the blanket, but sometimes if we're really tight in the hips, if we sit on a blanket, it can help just create a little bit of space in the hip joints. You can also have your blocks close by. I'm going to introduce the blocks partway through the pose. So we're going to be here 4 or 5 whole minutes. So finding those sits bones. Inhaling and exhaling. And just noticing how we feel in this position. And then perhaps starting to fold. So we can gently draw the abdominals in. So we're supporting the spine, but we allow the back to round. So essentially we allow the back to decompress. We create some space in the spine. We're creating some space in the hips. If you've put a blanket underneath you to sit on, you've created a little more space in the hips. Take a few breaths here. And just notice how you feel. You can rest the hands on your legs. They can be on the floor. This is where you can also bring in the blocks. And I like to have one just between my legs to rest my hands on. So letting the spine lengthen, but letting it round as we fold here. And again, let's just find our breath here. As we continue to breathe, let the jaw soften. Let the eyes be soft, whether they're open or closed. And start to get a sense that your bones are heavy. So kind of let them sink in towards the floor. And that might help us notice perhaps some space, whether it's in the spine, even the knees here, the hips. If you find your knees are locking, you can roll a little bit of a towel underneath them if that helps as well. Good. And we might find a little more space in the spine, and that might prompt us to find a place to rest our forehead. So that's where the blocks are nice. And then just take a moment here to find some stillness and just notice the space we've created. Letting the arms be heavy. The legs are heavy. Again, sensing the bones within are heavy. Letting the chest relax. Letting the feet relax. Just witnessing the breath. Keeping the neck nice and long wherever the head is. For these last 2 minutes, perhaps enjoying our Ujjayi breath, that Darth Vader breath or ocean breath. It's a little louder in the back of the throat. Noticing space wherever you can. Maybe a sense of lengthening in the low back. We have just over a minute here. Just trying to find a place where we can maximize the space in that soft edge. See if we can get a little heavier. Oh. Take one more breath here. That 5 minutes went by very quickly. Gently use your hands to help draw yourself back up. If we did put props, blocks in front of us, let's just move them out of the way. And let's just lean back a little bit and maybe windshield wipe the legs. Take a breath or two here before we change position. Now the next position is a low squat. And if it's not comfortable to you or your knees, you can come to what I call resting pose It's also your child's pose instead of this pose. So it's a deep squat. If we find we need a little lift for the heels, then we can double roll our mat a few times so we have a lift, or this is where you can bring the blanket in so your heels have something to land on. So we're gonna just find a standing position just momentarily. Take the feet wide, kind of the outside edge of your mat. And then keeping the back nice and long, we start to bend the knees and we lower down into this squat position so that our hips are down nice and low. So you'll notice my heels are on the floor here. So if yours are not, that's where you might want to place a blanket underneath your heels or set them on that rolled up mat. So this one we're only going to do for 3 minutes because it's quite intense. It can be intense on the knees. And your option is child's pose or resting pose, as I call it instead. Hands can be anywhere you like. They can be on the floor. You can have them to heart center or even resting on a block. And this is creating some space in the ankle joint, as you can tell, in the knees, in the hips, and maybe even a little bit of low back release here as we kind of let the hips, those sits bones at the bottom of our pelvic bowl, sink down towards the ground. And just breathing here, finding a place, again, our soft edge, so pulling back, less intense than our regular edge. So we're not pressing the knees against the arms like we would in a regular vinyasa style class. We're letting everything sink and be heavy. So letting the bones sink heavy towards the floor. And just breathe here. That back is nice and long, slightly rounded. Maybe we close our eyes here. Let the jaw soften. Breathe, let the hands, you can even just let them hang and be heavy. Know that we can get through this by focusing on our breath. So this can be quite intense. Try to stick with it. We're halfway there. We have 1.5 minutes left. Find that deep breath. You can feel the back expand as we take in that breath. Just letting the neck stay long. Just witnessing the breath as it comes and goes. Let the feet be heavy. Let the hips be heavy. Maybe we feel a lengthening in the spine here as they kind of hang. And for these last 35 seconds, let's just find stillness. And let's take one more breath here. Move any props out of the way. And we can just let our hands come back behind us, find our seat, and again, send those legs out, lean back. And then you can just windshield wipe the feet, take a few deep breaths here, appreciate the lengthening of the legs after that deep knee bend. Our next pose is going to be deer. So we do it on each side. Setting ourselves up, we're going to start with one leg in front, and then we're just going to bring the other leg out kind of behind us here. And we want to make sure the legs are 90-ish degrees. So we want to just make sure knee and ankle are in line with each other on each leg. And that's as far as we go. So we can sit in deer pose here. And we might need a little bit of cushioning. So if this knee or one of our knees are very lifted, you can place that blanket underneath so you can let it rest. Same with the back knee. And then just finding, so we're gonna hold each side for 5 minutes. Let me just start the timer here. So we can just sit up nice and tall and take a few breaths and just kind of get used to this posture here. Let the spine lengthen. So just creating some space in the hips. And because we have one leg moving in one direction, one's internally rotating, one's externally rotating, we're getting this balance, this yin and yang between each of the hips. And then we get that on both sides when we switch sides. Now you can stay centered here, or you can start to twist towards the thigh of the front leg. So you can bring your hands to the outside of that thigh in this nice twist. And that'll start to stimulate the digestive system. Anytime we twist, we're kind of wringing that stuff out. It can also be a nice release in the low back. So if the twist becomes too much, you can come back to the center. And in either case, we can start to fold a little bit over the legs. So in that twist, we can do the same thing. We can start to fold. Breathe. You might even fold far enough that your forearms come to the floor, or we just stay lifted. Take a few breaths here and really sense that your legs are heavy. So again, trying not to hold anything in particular, just kind of letting everything go so that connective tissue can find some space. Our connective tissue, our fascia in particular, is kind of like a gummy bear. So when you pull it, it gets a little bit of a stretch. And then when we come out of this position, it rebounds back, but it takes time. And that's why in a yin class, we hold the poses till we get that time to allow that gummy bear effect. Let the breath just be soft. Again, checking in, letting the bones, the muscles feel a sense of heaviness here. We have about 2 minutes left. Just see if we can create perhaps a little more space, maybe folding just a smidge more. Maybe sensing that the legs and the hips are a little heavier even. Let the feet relax. And then just take a moment to be here in this space. Just taking a moment to notice in this last minute, our soft edge. So knowing that we could probably go further in this pose, but choosing to pull back. So we can just focus on creating space. Just a few more breaths here. Maybe let the exhale be a tiny bit longer. Just finishing one more breath here. And if we came to the twist, actually wherever we are, let's start to lift ourselves up. If we folded, turn that off. Come back to the center for a brief moment if we did come to the twist. And then we're just gonna pull this bottom leg up. Take a moment to just sit. Just kind of let that side digest. See how your hips feel. Maybe inhale, sweep the arms up, stretch, create some space in the upper body, wave the body a little bit, and then lower the arms back down. We prepare for side two. So now the other leg is in front. So we want about 90 degrees in the angles of the legs here. Basically, the knee and the ankle are in alignment with each other. And again, we can have a blanket to fill some space if we need that blanket there. And then just finding our soft edge here. So starting our 5 minutes, sitting centered over this front leg, take a moment to take a breath or two and just release. Let the bones be heavy, let the muscles be heavy. Appreciating now we've internally and externally rotated the legs the opposite way. So we're creating that balance on side two. And once we're done both poses, we have complete balance from side to side, or as much as our body allows for anyway. So if we like, we can start to twist to the outside of that front thigh. And then just finding our breath here. So if we've added the twist, we're starting to stimulate again the digestive system, maybe working some stuff through there. You might also get a release in the lower back. I especially love the twist for that reason. I get a nice broadening, if you will, of the lower back in the twist. Now, if the twist isn't comfortable for you, obviously you come back to the center. In either position, you can start to fold the body a little bit more. So I'm at my soft edge here with my hands just pressing against the floor and just using a bit of soft energy to hold myself up. Now you might want to place your hands or your forearms even on a block. You might get to your forearms on the floor. I find that takes me past my soft edge a little bit, so I like to pull back. So listening to your own body in these postures is key, and it might take you a few times going through this class to just kind of figure all that out. Very much an act of body awareness and mindfulness as we notice how we feel. We're here for a long time, so we have the time to really get the feel. Again, taking a moment to sense that our bones are heavy. Try to release anything. If we're holding any tension in our muscles, just try to let it go and let everything kind of sink towards the floor. Again, with that intent to create space in our connective tissue. So we can think of the fascia, all the connective tissue, tendons, ligaments, even the bones to a certain degree, kind of like that gummy bear. So as we hold the pose, we're getting this nice elasticity, viscoelasticity as it pulls like we stretch a gummy bear. And then when we come out of this pose, as it rebounds back, it actually takes in more moisture. So what we're doing is we're hydrating our connective tissue here. And that's just good and yummy for the whole body. So just under 2 minutes, just find some stillness here. Let the jaw soften, let the eyes soften. And just witness the breath. As we finish out this last 30 seconds, just appreciate the space that you've created within your body. Take a few more deep breaths. Taking one more breath here. And if we folded, starting to walk ourselves up, use your hands to help center the body. Just pause here for a moment. And then we can bring that back leg around. And again, just sit for a moment. Now appreciating both hips with some evenness, some balance, or as much as they can possibly be after we've completed both sides of our deer pose. Let's inhale. Just create some space, maybe rock on those sits bones, wave the back a little bit, and then let the arms sweep back down. So our next pose is going to be straddle. And again, just like that caterpillar at the beginning of class, you may want to sit on a blanket. I am going to for this one so that my hips have a little more space. And you might want blocks here too, just like that caterpillar, we might fold to a place where we want to rest the head, or you might want to rest the hands on them. So we're taking our legs out wide. And in this position, we're going to hold for 5 minutes, creating some space in the hips. Just allowing the legs to relax, let the feet relax. So normally in a regular all levels class or vinyasa flow, we activate the legs a little bit. This time we're going to let them just chill. Breathe. And so normally too, we would also take ourselves a little deeper if we like. Take yourself deeper and then pull back a little yet again, finding that soft edge. And then just a gentle hold of the belly. We can start to fold here and round the back. So we're creating some space in the hips. We might be creating some space in the spine, a little bit of decompression as we round the back and fold here. And this is where you can start to bring in the blocks. You might rest the hands on them or the forearms on them and just breathe. So again, take a few breaths here. And as you do, try to let the legs be heavy. Let your body sink. Imagine the bones are heavy. And with each breath, try to let the legs just sink a little heavier in towards the floor, the earth. Just allowing that space to happen, to create that space with intention, as is the intent of a yin practice. Which if you've done restorative yoga, you know yin and restorative are very different classes. And again, here, if we've come to a place where we want to fold a little deeper and we want to rest the forehead, feel free to stack the blocks and just allow the forehead, the neck to be long, and then the hands can just sink heavy towards the floor. We're halfway there. Let's keep returning to the breath. Just always checking in, seeing if we're holding any muscles, and just let them go as we sink into the pose. For this last minute, letting the muscles of the face soften, let the eyes be soft. Appreciate this little bit of stillness in our day. Just taking 2 or 3 more breaths here. And if we folded, letting our hands gently, slowly walk us back up. We did use blocks, let's just move them out of the way. And then you might need a little bit of an assist here to bend the knees, and let's just bend them, sit back in a nice windshield wipe, a little rock, a little release before we move into our next set of poses. So we're going to come into our shoelace pose. Now I'm going to give you some options because that can be intense for some people on the hips and even on the knees, even the ankle joints. So if we want a little bit, if we're finding a softer edge, if you will, you might want to sit on your blanket, especially if we find those hips are tight. We're going to keep one leg extended and then just bring the other foot on top. If that's even too much, you can place your foot on the floor. If that's even too much, you can bring the foot out a little bit. All right. Otherwise, in our shoelace, we're going to bring that leg across. I'm going to pop this blanket out because I don't want to be sitting on it myself. And then the other leg is also going to fold in. So we kind of stack the knees as much as we can. And then we want to make sure we're seated on both sits bones. So this is where you might need to fill some gaps. So if you can't get your other sits bone on the floor, you can put a little bit of the blanket underneath there. And if you feel like you need a little more space or you need to take up the space between the knees, you can place a block or the blanket there. We're going to hold each side for only 4 minutes because this can be rather intense. Now I like to kind of rock into it just to make sure because sometimes you can have the skin or the clothes kind of sticking a little bit. So I take a little bit to just kind of settle myself in there. And we're really, as you can probably tell, creating some space in the hips, right in this kind of external area where our glute med is, where that hip socket just kind of happens at the top of the femur. Allow the knees and allow the legs and the feet to relax. So we can decide also in this position to fold a little bit to create some space in the spine. Now that might be uncomfortable, especially if it starts to pull in the hips. So just stay up tall. Again, this is a place where you can put the block. So you have a little bit of lift if you decide to fold. And again, just find your breath here. Just allowing for that soft edge. So if we start to fold and it becomes too intense, you can start to back off a little bit. Always appreciating less intensity. So listening to our body here. Just letting the breath soften. Letting the legs just sink into the space. And again, trying to hold as much as we can to really create that space in that connective tissue. But if we really need to come out, know you have the option of just doing the one leg as I showed. So we're just over halfway. Just letting the breath flow, breathing maybe into those spaces that are a little bit cranky, sticky right now. Let the shoulders release, let the arms release. You may be folding forward a little more than I am. Allow the back to be long, noticing the space in your spine. For this last minute, just allowing the muscles of the face to soften as we witness our breath, letting our body just sink, creating space wherever we can. I'm just taking 2 or 3 more breaths here. If we folded, using the hands to walk us back up, moving any props out of the way. And we can lean back and release those legs. Let's find that wide sit and windshield wipe to just find some release in the hips here before we change sides. So as a reminder, you can do this half shoelace with one leg extended and the other leg bent. You can sit on a blanket if you feel you need a little more release in the hips, acknowledging that one side might be different than the other side. So listen to your body. And again, it might take a few times doing this class to kind of figure all that out, and that's okay. We're gaining body awareness. So coming into side 2, so again, that would be the other leg on top, or we start to tuck. Now, here's another way that you can come into this pose. You can come into it from all fours, tuck one leg behind the other from here. Hopefully you can see that. And then we sink back into the pose from here. So either way you can get into it. That one takes a little bit of finesse to get used to. And then I like to just kind of rock. Sometimes you need to get rid of the stickiness of clothes or the skin, depending on what you're wearing. Sitting up nice and tall, take a few breaths, acknowledging how this feels, how the hips feel, acknowledging that this side might feel different than the side that we just did. And just take a moment to assimilate that. And again, you might want to fill just a little bit of space. So remember, it's not restorative, but if we feel like we need that blanket there, so we can really let the legs sit and be heavy, feel free. Or even if, as my foot dangles a little bit, so maybe just so the foot can sink heavy, we just put the blanket there. So up to you what you want to do. And then if we decide to fold, allowing the back to be long, the spine to round, you might place your hands on a block to bring the floor closer to you. And breathe. So I'm not quite ready to fold yet myself. I'm going to pull back. And close the eyes or soften them. Let the cheekbones and the jaw soften. As we continue to assess our soft edge, we might feel that we've created enough space that we can shift a little bit. And the mind might start to drift. Just come back to the breath. Come back to sensing that, again, the body is heavy, the bones are heavy. We're sinking to allow space to happen. And just continue to breathe here for this last little bit, knowing that shoelace is a fantastic way to soothe our nervous system. So just allowing that breath to happen, as much as it can be uncomfortable, there's a bit of comfort to it also. And just finishing 2 or 3 more breaths here. If we folded, let's use the hands to help us come back up, move props out of the way. And then we can unwrap the legs, find that wide seat again, and just windshield wipe to release those hips. So moving into our next, again, series of postures, we're going to do each side. We're going to come into side seal. So we're really going to lengthen the side body here. And you might want to have either a blanket or a block close by. So lying on our side, you can stack the legs or let them be long. And we're just going to come onto our forearm with our elbow underneath our shoulder. And then the other hand can just be on the floor. So we're going to do this again for 4 minutes on each side. And we want to lift ourselves up to create some space in the side of our body. Breathe. I'm going to extend my legs so it actually creates a little bit of core strength happening here. And that's okay. Now, if you want to intensify the posture, we just pick up the elbow and lift ourselves up. So we're in this side lying stretch, and then let the body sink a bit and be heavy. So in seal, whether we're in regular seal or the side seal, we can lock the elbow because we're not putting a lot of pressure on the joint, which in a typical yoga class, we don't lock the joints, but here we can do it. So we have that stability and we're not really activating the muscles. So I still like my hands to be in a starfish position here, fingertips strong, whether I'm on the elbow or not. Now, this is where if you don't want to be all the way up, you can place the elbow on a block or on a blanket instead. So you get that lift with a little more support. So we can switch or adjust to that. I'm going to stay up in the full seal and I want it to come from that forearm position. Breathe. So noticing we're lengthening the side facing the floor, kind of let the rib cage sink a bit heavy here. And then as much as we're activating the top side here, that locking of the elbow just decreases how much it's activated there. Good, let the jaw be soft. So if we need a little more support. We can bend the legs a little bit to have more support. Otherwise, we can lengthen them, and that will help to lengthen the side body also. So we're halfway there on this side. Breathe. Just let the head be in a neutral position, whatever feels okay for the neck. As we let the rib cage kind of sink here, you might start to feel a little bit of space between each of the ribs. So we have a minute left. Just let the breath come and go. Know that we can come back to the elbow if we need to pull back and soften our edge. Otherwise, we have 50 seconds left to breathe here. And just taking 2 or 3 more breaths here. If we were all the way up, let's start to come down to that elbow, and then we can actually send the arm out and just rest the head for a moment on the biceps. Take a breath or 2 here before we change sides. So you can just roll to the other side if you like, or you can do the complete turnaround like I'm about to do, and just set up side 2. And if you used a block, you might want it on this side. So we can have the knees a little bit bent for a little more stability here, or we can start to lengthen, just placing so the elbow is underneath our shoulder here and the forearm is out. Other hand can be in front of us. Taking a moment, you might even need to make a few adjustments here and there. And you might right away want to just place the block there and place your forearm on the block instead, so you get a little more lift without fully extending the arm. I'm actually going to hang out in this space for a little bit. It feels quite delightful. And breathe. So allowing the rib cage to kind of sink, feeling some space between the ribs, feeling some lengthening down the side body. So that fascia in our obliques, just creating some space there. You feel a little bit of space happening in the back while we're here. And so anytime we kind of stimulate the side body, we're supporting the lymphatic system, which basically flushes all the toxins out of our body. So we might feel a little energy boost as we flush some stuff out. And because we're also dealing with this area where our stomach, our intestinal organs are, you might feel a little bit of support and stimulation in the digestive system as well. And so just to show again that we can come from the forearm position all the way up, and we can let that elbow lock because we're not putting a lot of pressure on it in this position. So know that with all poses that we do one side and then the other, it might be completely different on each side, and just honor and respect that. That's where our body is right now. Just witnessing the breath, letting it come and go, letting that rib cage be a little bit heavy here, creating that space. You may have noticed I just moved my hand. Feel free if you need to make little shifts. As the body settles, you might have to make a little bit of a shift. Ideally, we want to find stillness, but we want to be uncomfortably comfortable, but we don't want to be completely uncomfortable. So if little adjustments help, take advantage of them. Breathe. So just finishing 2 or 3 more breaths here. If we were all the way up, start to make your way down, and then we can extend the arm and just rest the head on the bicep here. Take a few breaths as we release the sides of our body. And we're going to move into our last posture, and I'm going to lead that right into our final relaxation. So feel free to extend the final relaxation on your end. On my end, it's going to be a little bit short because I'm going to use this last pose as part of our final relaxation. Now, you will need 2 blocks for this one. You can also use a bolster if you like. So supported fish, we want to get some nice support for the spine. And you can also throw a blanket over yourself because this is melding into our final relaxation and you're going to want to keep your body warm. So we want to kind of just find the end of the rib cage and have that block there so it's supported and it lifts the rib cage up a little bit, and then finding a block to rest the head on. You might need to make a few adjustments there so you're fully supported, keeping the neck long. So if we do that swallow test, we should still be able to swallow naturally in this position. And then we're going to hold this for 5 minutes, and like I said, morph into our final relaxation, and this can be our final relaxation. And then just letting the body sink. So we're letting the block on our rib cage open up the rib cage, create space here. And this will help take a deep breath. It'll help create space to really fill the lungs, feel them move. And when we can take a deep breath, it entices our body to relax. So we want to take as many deep breaths throughout our day as we can. The head is supported here and the neck is long. And just letting the arms kind of hang, you might feel some space happening in the shoulders, maybe even in the elbows. Let your legs be heavy. They might just curl out to the sides. Your feet might just curl. Breathe. If you find you get chilly, you can always either pause the video, put a blanket on yourself, get back into this position, or have somebody in your space just say, hey, can you put a blanket on me? And then you don't even have to move. So again, letting the muscles of the face soften, the eyes might be closed here, and letting the body really sink into this pose, really noticing that space between the ribs, opening up, allowing that deep breath. Let the exhale maybe soften and lengthen here. Checking in with our soft edge. As the body creates space, you might have to adjust, and that's okay. And then just come back to stillness and the breath. Kind of if our mind starts to wander, just come back to the breath. Come back to sensing the space we've created, that sense of heaviness. And even though we feel heavy, we might feel open also. But ultimately, just letting the mind focus on our breath, moving in and moving out. You might notice that now that we've opened up the rib cage, we can breathe with more ease. And know that it's normal that you may also feel the opposite with that block on the back side of the ribs, that you may feel a little bit of restriction. So just acknowledging everything you feel, knowing that there's no right, there's no wrong, there's no judgment. It is what it is. And the intent right now is to create space in the front of the ribs. So as we start to shift our focus to our final relaxation, if you find this very relaxing, you can stay right here. Otherwise, you can slowly use your arms, your hands to peel yourself up, move the blocks out of the way, and then come back down to your final relaxation. And this is where we can also add a few more props to make us more comfortable, throw a blanket over ourselves, put on socks and sweaters. I'm going to keep it short for our purposes here today, but feel free to pause or even stop the video and continue with your final relaxation on your own. And as we just close out our practice, if we're staying in final relaxation, just maybe picking a mantra to focus on. So I'm going to allow us to sit in whatever position or lie, whatever position for the next minute. And then I'm going to seal our practice and you can continue as long as you like. So just finding a mantra, and perhaps at the end of a yin class, that mantra is, I am open and accepting. So just witnessing our breath moving in and moving out, and just saying to ourselves, saying within, I am open and accepting. Or whatever mantra resonates with you. Again, staying here as long as you like, letting the effects of our practice assimilate. Let our body absorb that moisture in its connective tissue. So we are healthier as we move throughout our day. Namaste.